Well, meanwhile, President Donald Trump is blasting special counsel Robert Mueller today amid accusations that the president's former campaign chair lied to investigators. Well, this morning in a series of tweets, the president accused investigators of treating witnesses viciously and ruining their lives. He also claimed Mueller was doing tremendous damage to the justice system, but he didn't have any specifics. The tirade comes after Mueller accused Paul Manafort of violating a plea agreement in the Russia investigation by repeatedly lying to investigators. Manafort denies the claims. At the same time, the president is also expressing frustration with the General Motors decision to close plants and to cut jobs. In a Wall Street Journal interview, Mr. Trump said that he thought GM should stop making cars in China and added, quote, "I think they forgot where they came from." The president will also be watching today's Senate runoff election in Mississippi as voters head to the polls. Democrat Mike Espy is up against Republican Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith in a heated race that's gained a great deal of national attention for allegations of racism. President Trump campaigned for Hyde-Smith Monday with 2 rallies in the state. And during his visit, the president also took the time to defend the use of tear gas on migrants trying to cross the border illegally over the weekend.
First of all, the tear gas is a very minor form of the tear gas itself. It's very safe. The ones that were suffering to a certain extent were the people that were putting it out there.
He's also repeating his calls for Congress to fund his border wall with just 10 days until a partial government shutdown. Scott Wong is a senior staff writer for The Hill. He joins me now from Washington. So, Scott, I want to start with the Mueller probe because there's a new report in The Guardian that states that Manafort held secret talks with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange just months before they actually published emails that were hacked by the Russians. You know, it reportedly happened around the same time that Manafort joined the Trump campaign. So bottom line, what are the questions that are raised by this article?
Well, I think the questions, and certainly what Robert Mueller is going to be looking at now, is whether there was some sort of coordination or collusion. This would seem like there's more evidence pointing to that between the Trump campaign, given the timing of this meeting that we really had not heard about before. To have the campaign chairman for Donald Trump sitting in the room with Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, the person responsible for releasing the Democratic National Committee and John Podesta emails that, really to a lot of people's mind altered the course of the race and of history. And so Mueller, we can imagine, is going to be digging into this new information in The Guardian. And it's really put, I think, Paul Manafort and some of his associates on the hot seat.
And Scott, this is coming after Mueller accused Manafort of violating his plea agreement. The president even tweeted about it today. Where do you think this puts the president?
I think the president is feeling very much on the defensive right now. I think he feels like the walls are closing in. Mueller is now going after Manafort for lying, even though they believed they had an agreement, a plea deal with Manafort, and that he was going to be a cooperating witness. They are now saying that Manafort has been lying to them during the course of this process and could be facing even more years in prison. So the president is seeing a lot of his allies being prosecuted by Bob Mueller. We had another one just this week with Jerome Corsi, an associate of Roger Stone, who was indicted for lying to the FBI. And so, we're seeing just more prosecutions, more indictments coming across, and I think the president is really feeling the pressure.
And in addition to that pressure, we know the president's also frustrated with GM, General Motors. He said that they need to make their cars in the U.S., not in China. Give us a sense, Scott, how have his policies really affected this issue?
Well, I think we have to point to the Trump tariffs imposed earlier this year. In fact, over the summer, GM said the steel and aluminum tariffs coupled with tariffs imposed on imported car parts really would be harmful to the car maker and would result, they previewed, would result in thousands of layoffs and possibly some plant closures. We saw that happen just yesterday with GM announcing several plant closures in Ohio and Michigan. Obviously, these are states that Trump won in 2016, as well as in Maryland and Ontario, Canada. Nearly 15,000 layoffs across the country, and just as we enter the holiday season.
Scott, you mentioned Ohio and Michigan. I'm curious, have you heard anything from lawmakers there? How are they responding to this?
They're not happy. Obviously, you know, for somebody like Tim Ryan, who is a member of the House of Representatives, one of the auto plants that will be closing is in his district. 1,500 jobs gone just like that. We saw, reports yesterday of what these folks who work at these plants are feeling. Incredible economic pressure, right before the holiday season, right before Christmas. And some of these lawmakers are now calling for hearings. They want to know exactly what is the cause of this. Certainly a lot of Democrats will be pointing to the tariffs. Maybe even some Republicans will be pointing to the Trump tariffs. But now lawmakers, especially Democrats who will be taking control of these committees and the House of Representatives early next year, are now calling for some hearings into GM.
In addition to that, the president is also defending the use of tear gas at the border. What's been the temperature on Capitol Hill about this? How has Congress responded to these developments?
Well, I think there's two ways of thinking right now on Capitol Hill. Obviously, there are lawmakers who believe that people should not just be rushing across the border illegally. Certainly, that is the view of the president. The president says nobody will be coming across the border illegally and crossing into the United States. That's against the law, and we will not stand for it. But I think in terms of the public relations war, that image of the mother who's dragging her two toddlers to safety away from the tear gas that's being fired into Mexico by the border agents has really touched a lot of lawmakers and forced them to really reckon with this growing problem. And so clearly it's not, as the president said, just he's calling them grabbers, people who are just grabbing children trying to claim asylum. These are, some of them are mothers and children who truly are fleeing violence in Central America and trying to find a better life in the United States.
I want to also ask you about the funding for the border wall. We know the government funding deadline is just over a week away. Are lawmakers preparing for a shutdown over this?
Yeah, we're just a handful of days away, the deadline in early December. And so Trump is insisting, as he has repeatedly over the course of this year and last year, that he wants $5 billion for his border wall on the Mexico border. Democrats who will be Democrats who still have, filibuster abilities in the United States Senate are saying they will not agree to that $5 billion. They will agree to $1.6 billion. That has been on the table from Democrats. And so it's really a game of chicken at this point, a standoff between Democrats and President Trump over this border wall. President Trump coming off a very bad night on election night where the House of Representatives flipped and Democrats gained 40 seats, maybe trying to make a stand as we head into the holidays and sending a message to his voters that he wants to uphold his promises. And so maybe he will be willing to shut down the government on this occasion.
I want to also ask you about Dems in the House. Tomorrow, House Dems will actually vote for their leadership. You had an article that was titled, "Dems Play, Let's Make a Deal with Nancy Pelosi." Where does her bid for the speakership stand at this point, Scott?
So what's going to happen is tomorrow there will be an internal secret ballot vote within the Democratic caucus. She will win easily. She's unopposed in that race. So, to prevent her, she's going to be having a lot of momentum coming out of the Wednesday vote for a formal vote on January 3rd on the House floor. And so a lot of these Democratic lawmakers are trying to cut a deal with her in order to pledge their support, and they're hoping to get on certain committees, or maybe they want Pelosi to prioritize a certain transportation project. So a lot of them are going to Pelosi with their wish list and saying, I can support you for Speaker in Wednesday and heading into the January 3rd vote, but here are some things that I need. And so there's a lot of discussions happening in the Capitol, and Pelosi has certainly had a full agenda, people shuffling in and out of her office as they bring her some of their wish lists. Right now, it looks like she is the favorite, certainly, to be the next Speaker of the House, but a number of rebels are hoping to block her on the House floor on January 3rd. She probably can lose at this point about 17 Democrats. Anything more than that, it will throw the House into complete chaos.
But, here's the thing, Scott. We know about these folks blocking Pelosi, but I don't hear any solid name coming out of someone that folks can largely get around besides Pelosi. Is there another name out there?
Yeah, that seems to be the strategy, is not putting forth a name, not putting forth a target before January 3rd, but simply blocking her on the floor, preventing her from reaching that magic number of half of the entire House of Representatives, 218 votes. Then once they prove that she cannot reach 218, that magic number, they would then look for an alternate candidate. And we've seen one of those names mentioned, Marcia Fudge from Ohio. She, last week, cut a deal with Pelosi. She was one of the ones who got a deal with Pelosi and endorsed Pelosi for Speaker. So this seems to be part of the strategy of these insurgents, is not to put a specific name forward, but to wait until they can deny her on the floor, and then hoping that somebody else emerges.
All right, Scott Wong, grateful you can join us, Scott. Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much.